Daniel Hartman paid for the meal before the food even reached their table. He did it quietly, without standing up, without asking for thanks, without knowing why his hand was already holding his card. The waitress paused when he whispered the request, glanced at the small family across the room, then back at him. Daniel didn't explain. He only said, "Please don't tell him it was me." The moment the card left his hand, something inside him shifted. Daniel was a billionaire, one of those names people recognize without knowing the man behind it. 43 years old, powerful, respected, and unbearably alone. He sat at a corner table in a modest restaurant, dressed in a tailored coat that cost more than most monthly rents, staring at a family who owned almost nothing and yet somehow looked more complete than it felt in years. The restaurant was warm, filled with the low hum of voices and clinking plates. Daniel had come here to escape the silence of his penthouse, the kind of silence that echoed even when music played. He always ate alone, always left alone. Tonight was supposed to be no different. Then the family walked in. They had entered quietly, like people used to not being noticed. A tired mother, a stiff-backed father, and between them a small child clutching a worn backpack. Their clothes were old but clean. Their faces were careful, hopeful, restrained. Daniel noticed them instantly, though he couldn't have said why. They sat 2 tables away from him. Daniel watched as they studied the menu, whispering, calculating. When the waitress came, they ordered one meal. Just one. Extra plates. That was when Daniel felt a familiar ache tighten in his chest. The same ache he carried home every night. The same one money had never touched. Now, as he waited for the waitress to return to them with news that their meal was already paid for, Daniel stared down at his own untouched plate. He had lost his appetite the moment he saw how the parents divided the food, making sure the child's portion looked bigger. The child noticed, of course. Children always did. The small hand pushed food back toward the mother with quiet insistence. Daniel looked away, his throat tight. He hadn't meant to pay. Not consciously. It wasn't charity. It wasn't generosity. It was instinct, raw and sudden, like breathing, as if some part of him recognized something in that family before his mind caught up. The waitress returned to the family's table. Daniel didn't hear her words, but he saw the reaction immediately. The mother froze. The father's shoulders sagged in relief. The child's eyes widened, scanning the room. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. The mother pressed a hand to her mouth. The father whispered something that looked like gratitude, maybe a prayer, and the child, too perceptive, too observant, kept looking, not begging, not searching for wealth, searching for intention. The child's eyes found Daniel. For a brief second, everything else in the restaurant faded. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply met the child's gaze, unprepared for the quiet weight of it. There was no accusation there, no expectation, only understanding, as if the child somehow knew this wasn't about money at all. Daniel looked down, suddenly uncomfortable. He hadn't felt seen like that in years. His life, from the outside, looked full. Headlines, boardrooms, awards. But inside, it had been hollow for a long time. His penthouse was immaculate and lifeless, every surface polished, every room silent. He avoided the long dining table meant for gatherings, and ate standing at the counter instead. Some nights, without thinking, he set out 2 plates. He always noticed before sitting down. He always put one away. Tonight, he had come to this restaurant because the silence had followed him home again. Daniel remembered a different life. Cheap furniture, shared meals, laughter that filled the air instead of echoing off walls. He remembered promises made softly, plans spoken with certainty. He remembered losing everything that made those memories possible. He had learned to survive by not feeling. Until now, the family ate slowly, savoring every bite, unaware of the storm inside the man who had paid for their meal. Daniel watched the child laugh at something the father said, watched the mother relax for the first time since arriving. They weren't pretending anymore. For this brief moment, they were just a family having dinner. Something tightened painfully in Daniel's chest. Around them, life continued. A couple argued softly. A man complained about cold food. Someone laughed too loudly. No one noticed a miracle happening at a small table near the window. No one noticed the billionaire in the corner quietly unraveling. Daniel realized with startling clarity that this simple act, this unnoticed kindness, felt more real than any deal he had ever signed. He hadn't bought influence. He hadn't bought loyalty. He had bought 1 hour of peace for people who needed it more than he ever had. And somehow, it was giving him something back. The family finished eating. The parents stood, gathering their things. The child lingered, glancing once more around the room. Daniel felt a strange panic, as if something important was about to slip away. The child walked past Daniel's table, slowing just slightly. Daniel held his breath. He didn't know yet that the child would leave something behind. He didn't know this night would follow him long after the restaurant closed. All he knew in that fragile moment was that for the first time in years, his money had done something his heart desperately needed. And this was only the beginning. The family reached the door, but the child stopped. It was not sudden or dramatic, just a pause, small, deliberate. The parents continued a few steps ahead before realizing the child was no longer between them. The mother turned, worry flashing across her face, then softened when she saw the child standing still, looking back into the restaurant, looking at Daniel. Daniel's heart skipped in a way it hadn't in years. The child's backpack slipped slightly from one shoulder as they took a careful step toward his table. Not rushed, not afraid, Daniel straightened unconsciously, unsure whether he should speak, unsure whether he should pretend not to notice. He had paid for the meal anonymously for a reason. He didn't want gratitude. He didn't want attention. But the child wasn't coming to say thank you. The child stopped beside his table and placed something gently on the empty space near Daniel's plate. Then, without a word, turned and walked back to their parents. Daniel froze. The parents noticed only when the child tugged at the mother's coat, whispering something too soft to hear. The mother glanced back, startled, then nodded once, as if accepting something she didn't fully understand. They left together, the bell above the door chiming softly behind them. The restaurant noise returned all at once. Daniel stared at the object on the table. It was small, almost nothing. A folded piece of paper, creased and worn, with a child's uneven handwriting peeking from the edge. Beside it lay a plastic button, blue, cracked down the middle, clearly broken from something long gone. His fingers hovered above it. For a moment, Daniel didn't touch either. His chest felt tight, his breath shallow. He had spent years training himself not to react, not to feel, not to reach for things that could hurt. This felt dangerous in a way no business risk ever had. Finally, he unfolded the paper. The words were written carefully, each letter shaped with effort. Thank you for making my parents smile. I hope you are not lonely anymore. Daniel's vision blurred. The button rolled slightly as his hand trembled. When his fingers brushed it, the world tilted. He knew that button. Or rather, he knew one exactly like it. Same color, same crack, same cheap plastic feel. Memory slammed into him without mercy. A small jacket, blue, too thin for winter. A tiny voice laughing as it ran ahead of him on a sidewalk years ago. Daniel remembered kneeling to fasten a button that wouldn't stay closed. Remembered promising to fix it later. Remembered not getting a chance. The room felt too small. Daniel pushed his chair back abruptly and stood. The waitress noticed at once and hurried over, concern in her eyes. Sir, are you all right? He nodded once, unable to speak. He slid the paper carefully into his coat pocket and closed his hand around the button like it might disappear if he let go. Outside, the night air hit him hard. The family was gone. Daniel stood on the sidewalk longer than he realized, scanning both directions, heart pounding. He told himself it didn't matter. It was one moment, one child, one coincidence. But his body didn't listen to reason. His chest ached with urgency. He had to find them. The drive home was silent. Daniel didn't turn on the radio. His penthouse greeted him with its usual quiet. But tonight it felt unbearable. He didn't remove his coat. He didn't turn on the lights. He stood in the dark, pressing the button into his palm until it hurt. The note replayed in his mind. I hope you are not lonely anymore. How could a child see that so clearly? Daniel sank onto the couch and laughed once, a broken sound. Lonely. He had built an empire to outrun that word. Bought silence. Bought distance. Bought control. And still, a child who owned nothing had recognized the truth in seconds. He didn't sleep that night. At dawn, Daniel made calls he had never made before. Not to executives. Not to lawyers. He contacted shelters, community kitchens, outreach centers, names he had skimmed past on donation lists without a second thought. Did a family come in last night? He asked again and again. 2 parents. 1 child. About 7. Most said no. Some said maybe. None were certain. Days passed. Daniel returned to the restaurant. He sat at the same table, staring at the same space where the button had rested. The waitress recognized him and smiled kindly. They come by sometimes, she said after he asked quietly. Not every week, but they try. Do you know where they stay? Daniel asked. She shook her head. I wish I did. Daniel left more unsettled than before. That evening, he drove through parts of the city he had avoided for years. Streets where neon lights flickered and hope wore thin. He parked and walked, coat pulled tight, the button still in his pocket like a compass. At a small shelter near the edge of downtown, he saw them. They were sitting on the steps, the child between them, drawing with a stubby pencil on scrap paper. The same backpack rested against the wall. Daniel stopped several feet away. The child looked up first. Their eyes widened, not in surprise, but recognition. The child smiled. Daniel swallowed hard and stepped closer. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't explain. He crouched to the child's level and held out the button. You dropped this, he said softly. The child shook their head. No, they said. I gave it to you. Daniel closed his fingers around it again. The mother stood slowly, wary but polite. Is something wrong, sir? Daniel shook his head. His voice came out rough. No, he said. I just want to say hello. The child looked between them, then took Daniel's hand without asking. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't pull away. And in that moment, he understood something that would change his life forever. The meal had fed them for one night, but what the child gave him would not let him walk away again. Daniel didn't expect the child's hand to feel so warm in his. The simple contact sent a quiet shock through him, steady and grounding, as if something broken inside had found its missing piece. He remained crouched there, unsure how long he had been still, until the mother gently cleared her throat. Her eyes carried caution, but also exhaustion, the kind that came from holding life together with nothing but hope. I'm Daniel, he said finally, standing. He didn't add his last name. He didn't want titles here. I saw you at the restaurant. The father studied him closely, then nodded. Thank you, he said, voice firm but grateful. We don't usually accept help. Daniel believed him. I didn't come to offer money, Daniel said, surprising himself with how true it felt. I just wanted to know you were okay. The child looked up at him. We are, they said seriously. We had dinner. Daniel smiled for the first time that night. They talked there on the steps, the city waking around them. The parents spoke carefully at first, then more freely. A job lost after an injury. Medical bills. Rent missed by weeks that turned into months. Pride swallowed daily so their child wouldn't feel it. Daniel listened without interrupting. No boardroom. No contracts. Just people telling the truth. When Daniel offered coffee from a nearby cafe, they hesitated, then agreed. They sat together at a small outdoor table. The child drew pictures on napkins, houses with smoke rising from chimneys, stick figures holding hands. Daniel noticed he was always included, drawn a little taller, always smiling. He didn't leave after one coffee. Over the next days, Daniel returned. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes with books, sometimes with nothing but time. He learned the child's favorite stories, learned the parents' names, learned how much dignity meant to people who had lost everything else. Quietly, carefully, he helped. A short-term apartment arranged through one of his companies, never revealing his position. A job interview for father. Manual work at first, honest and stable. Medical appointments scheduled and paid for without discussion. But the most important change wasn't theirs. It was Daniel's. He stopped eating alone. The first night they invited him to their small kitchen table. Daniel stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure where to place himself. The child pulled out a chair with determination. "You sit here," they said. Daniel obeyed. They ate soup that night. Simple, warm, real. The parents talked about the day. The child told a story with wild gestures and dramatic pauses. Daniel laughed, actually laughed, and startled himself with a sound. Later, walking back to the silent penthouse, he realized it no longer felt like home. Weeks passed, then months. Daniel's world shifted slowly, quietly, like dawn creeping in unnoticed. He still ran companies, still signed deals, but he left work earlier. He declined invitations that didn't matter. He found himself thinking less about profit and more about presence. One evening, the child handed him a folded drawing. Inside was the restaurant, the small table, 4 figures sitting together. Above them, written carefully, "Thank you for eating with us." Daniel framed it and placed it in his living room. He also placed a new table there, a real one, with space for more than one. The night he invited them over for the first time, Daniel cooked. The food was terrible. The child declared it the best ever. The parents smiled like people who had stopped bracing for disaster. After dinner, the child explored the penthouse, marveling at the view, the elevator, the echoing halls. Finally, they stopped in front of a closed door. "What's in there?" the child asked. Daniel hesitated, then opened it. The room was small, unused, a storage space once meant for something else. The child stepped inside, imagining. "This could be a room," they said softly. Daniel swallowed. "Yes," he said, "it could." That night, after they left, Daniel stood alone in that empty space. He didn't feel sad. He felt ready. The next morning, he made a call that changed everything. Paperwork followed. Interviews. Home visits. Long conversations filled with fear and hope in equal measure. Daniel learned that love was not a single decision, but 1,000 small ones chosen daily. On the day it became official, the child ran into his arms without hesitation. "You didn't eat alone anymore," the child said, smiling. Daniel held them close, tears finally free. "No," he whispered. "I don't think I ever will again." The button stayed in his pocket, worn smooth from touch, not as a reminder of loss, but as proof that sometimes the smallest gift left on a table could lead a lonely man home. The restaurant never knew what started that night. Months later, Daniel stood in his penthouse kitchen, watching the child carefully arrange plates on the table. Not the counter, not a small corner, the real table, the one that used to gather dust. The child took this responsibility seriously, counting each place twice, making sure no one was forgotten. "For," the child announced proudly. Daniel smiled. He still did that now. Smiled without effort, without surprise. It came naturally, like breathing. The parents moved easily around the kitchen, no longer cautious guests but family. Laughter bounced off the walls that once echoed with silence. The smell of food, real food, imperfect and warm, filled the space Daniel had once rushed through just to escape. He thought back to the man he used to be, the one who measured life in numbers and square footage, the one who believed loneliness was the price of success. That man felt distant now, like someone he'd read about once. Dinner began with a simple prayer spoken by the child, eyes closed tightly, hands folded with determination. Daniel bowed his head, emotion pressing behind his eyes. When they ate, it wasn't careful or quiet. It was messy, loud, alive. Someone spilled water. Someone laughed too hard. Someone told the same story twice. No one minded. After dinner, the child climbed onto Daniel's lap and handed him a familiar piece of folded paper. This one was new. "Open it," the child said. Inside was a drawing of the restaurant from that first night. The small table, the meal, a tiny blue button drawn carefully in the corner. Above it, written slowly but clearly, "Thank you for seeing us." Daniel's hands trembled as he pulled the child into a hug. Later that night, When the apartment finally grew quiet, Daniel didn't feel the old emptiness return. He walked to the window, city lights stretching endlessly below, and slipped the blue button from his pocket. It was worn smooth now, its crack barely visible. He placed it gently beside the framed drawing. Daniel understood something at last. He hadn't saved a family. They had saved him, not with money, not with gratitude, but with a child's simple truth, that loneliness recognizes loneliness, and kindness, when given freely, always finds its way back. The table stayed full after that. Not every night, not perfectly, but enough. And Daniel Hartman, the man who once had everything except home, finally knew what it meant to belong,